Hey guys, today's video is all about fighter artifacts. I'll be testing them in Artifact Material Raid 18, Guild Boss Nightmare 3, and Nightmare 4. Just so you know, this is the test server that is not Forerunner, nor is it global server. It's just server set up for content creators to test and make videos. For my testing, I used this hero, Abomination. The reason for it was slightly flawed. I used him because I thought he did AoE damage, but I did a lot of testing in one sitting and I forgot that's only on his charge attacks or when his ultimate is active, and I didn't want that. I wanted the consistency of just his normal attacks. So it worked fine, but I was unable to test the AoE artifacts, although we can really easily deduce that, and I will update my DPS calculator to include the artifacts as well, so you can easily test them yourself. But we do have a bunch of results regardless. I didn't skill up my Abomination as I like to have just 100% damage. It's quite easy, and all of the tests were done before the ultimate activated, as well as without having any stacks of Blood of Agony or anything else. In terms of gear, he's in the Calamity set with attack and crit rate. He's got crit damage as well. Most of his gear is just attack bonus, but he does have some crit damage as well. So as you can see, it's the same as my other videos. 98% bonus crit damage, 52% crit rate, so I can test the crit and non-crit damage, and a decent amount of attack bonus that's somewhere over 200%. So with that, the artifacts that I tested, I'll show you the whole table now. It's a very big table. I keep changing how I'm testing because it is relevant to the class you're testing for. So here is a massive table for you. So my testing: Abomination, Artifact Material Raid 18, Guild Boss Nightmare 3, Nightmare 4, non-crit, crit, non-crit, crit, all the way throughout. At level 1 on all 5 of the artifacts I chose to test. Level 1 with bleed, because bleed is incredibly important if you're running Salazar, and especially in Guild Boss teams, I thought this was going to be very important. And the reason I had to do it for every single one, if you don't know, bleed does actually increase the physical damage taken by enemies by 10%. So I wanted to make sure that I was factoring that into my results as well. Otherwise it would make Scarlet Hunt look even better, when in fact other artifacts hitting bleeding targets would still do more damage as well. So I included testing on all of these at level 1 and at level 25 with and without bleed, just to give the fairest representation possible. So back to the table. Yeah, level 1 with and without bleed, level 25 with and without bleed. I have ranked them in order of the highest damage done for, it's mainly focused on the crit value, but it seems to obviously follow suit. It's all using the same gear, the same set, the same hero. No Lord bonuses are in effect, and I have no Pantheon bonuses on this account as well, which makes it very easy to test. So, what do we test? The Scarlet Hunt, Void Gazer, Flawless Blade, Slayer's Presence, and of course Ancestral Teachings. So I'm going to put this table away for now because it's a bit too big to actually have anything else on the screen, or I'll make it smaller, but I'll pull it back up at the end so that we can discuss it. But for now I want to show you the artifacts that was being tested. So we started things off with a level 1 Scarlet Hunt. This grants you 20% damage to targets inflicted with bleed. So if the target was not bleeding Scarlet Hunt, it ranked bottom out of 5. Just quickly before we go into the rest of these, actually, something I want to mention. You may notice there's a bunch of artifacts missing from this. Crystal of Vileness, for example, is not tested. I do not think it's a bad artifact. It's just it grants a Shadow Guard that has stats, and it doesn't have a simple result like the damage test I'm doing. I want to show just like for like which artifact makes you hit harder, because the most dominant artifact at the moment is Scarlet Hunt, of course. So I'm not using Crystal of Vileness in this test. I do think it's a good artifact, but I haven't done testing on it yet because it doesn't fit in line with the rest of my test cases. Aside from that, I haven't done Soul Drainer because this gives block and health restore. It doesn't offer any damage. I did not test Eye of Sin in the end, unfortunately, because Abomination's first attack does not deal AoE damage. However, if we compare Eye of Sin, it is a 10% AoE damage bonus, 5% if you kill an enemy. So that is actually worse than a Scarlet Hunt even still. 20% damage to bleeding. This is 15% if you've actually got any stacks. And at full stacks, it would still be worse than the Flawless Blade as well. It is, of course, damage bonus as well, not attack bonus. So it's not going to scale fantastically either. I didn't use the exclusive Abomination Skull of Ira because it's just a rage bonus. And there are a whole load of legendary artifacts I didn't include in my testing, such as Vorof's Wrath, which is crit rate, which doesn't affect damage numbers. I didn't test Chain of Rage either because this is just too awkward to try to test. I'm trying to get very low amount. I mean, it's crit damage anyway, so it's going to suck, to be honest. This is again just crit rate. We have the North's Horn, which is crit rate again. Lucky Legacy does not affect damage. Watchguard's Ambition is actually quite a good artifact, I believe. But because it's a bonus chance to deal bonus damage, it's not really in line with the rest of the test cases, so I didn't include it. But other than those, I did try to include as many artifacts as I can. So back to the video. We'll talk about Artifact Material Raid. It does have a higher resistance than Guild Boss. Not massive, but it does actually have quite high resistance. Bear in mind, fighters do have very high base attack compared to marksmen and mages. So we can see here 20,000 is the total attack for my abomination. At level 1, we're comparing Scarlet Hunt, which is a 20% damage increase against bleeding targets. We're comparing it with the Void Gazer, which is really strangely worded, but it says that it increases the damage by 3% for every tile beyond the first tile between you and the enemy. So there's some quirky stuff with this one. And we are testing the Flawless Blade, which increases your damage dealt by 6% every 4 seconds up to 3 stacks. So it takes you up to 12 and 18% damage bonus. These stacks do not have a duration, and they are only lost 1 a stack at a time upon taking damage. So it's actually quite feasible to remain at 2 stacks. Most of the time, if you're outside of Guild Boss, it's very easy to stay at 3 stacks. And finally, the last 2 being tested are Slayer's Presence at level 1 is a 10% damage increase. So very similar to the baseline of the Eye of Sin. And we're of course comparing it to my new favorite Ancestral Teachings, which is 8% of your total attack as a bonus if you're next to an ally. So those are the artifacts that we're testing. Now I'm going to pull up the giant table and we're going to go over the numbers one by one. We have the no artifact acid test. You can see that it is a 15.7k crit on Artifact Material Raid 18's Salazar and is a 21.6k near enough on Nightmare 4. So you can see there is a higher resistance on Artifact Material Raid than on Nightmare 4. If you don't know, Abomination does a normal damage type, so that isn't going to be affecting the results enemy to enemy. So if we look at Artifact Material Raid at level 1 with the artifacts, we can see that Flawless Blade wins without bleed because it is an 18% damage increase, with Scarlet Hunt at the bottom. Interestingly, Ancestral Teachings is second place, losing only to the Flawless Blade, which does have a requirement of not taking damage to maintain full stacks. These were tested at full stacks where possible. So Slayer's Presence was tested at 4 HP, Flawless Blade was tested at max stacks, and Void Gazer was tested as far away as I could. So without bleed, we have Flawless Blade first, we have Ancestral Teachings second, Slayer's Presence third, Void Gazer, and then Scarlet Hunt. So Void Gazer was obviously not very good for Abomination. It's not great to hit someone point blank, or 3% damage increase it seems to be. So it does seem to include the first tile, even though it says not, because otherwise it would have the same damage as Scarlet Hunt, because this is the non-bleed results. So this is basically just the base damage from a level 1 artifact. And Void Gazer's is higher. It would be the same if there was no damage bonus coming in, so we can assume this is from the 3% damage bonus. So that's the level 1 results. If we look at Guild Boss, it is almost the same. We still have Flawless Blade winning, but now Void Gazer has shot from 4th to 2nd position. You may think, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, let me show you actually. So I'm going to equip my Abomination in a level 25 Void Gazer, 8% damage for every tile beyond the first. We're going to jump straight into Nightmare 4. And we're going to place Abomination at the front. And he does 33,638 crit damage. 33,638. We're going to restart. And this time we're going to place him 1 tile back. And you'll see he does 35,954 crit damage. And you may be thinking, okay, so he gained some damage from moving back a tile. Well, now let me show you with a Scarlet Hunt, also level 25. Again by himself. So he has not got the bleed effect on, so this should be the base damage. So here we are, we're equipping a level 25 Scarlet Hunt, so the stats are exactly the same attack, but now he won't get the however much bonus damage it was from being further away, and we'll place him at the front. So previously we had 33,638 crit, and now we have 173 crit. So you may think, well, what the hell, that doesn't make any sense. Now, I want you to pay attention to the tiles on the dragon. Notice there are 4 tiles going back. I believe that when you use Void Gazer, you do damage from his ass, I guess. So I think it's adding the percentage damage for each of these tiles and you're hitting him way at the back. This is also likely why Araka and the Piercer teams do so well in Guild Boss. I think it's because it's using all these tiles for the distance. So if you place a Piercer team all the way at the back row here, they're covering so many tiles to get to the boss. Something like 7 tiles between them and hitting the boss. I don't know exactly where it falls, but it's somewhere around there. So yeah, just an interesting tidbit of information there for you about the Void Gazer and why it does so much more damage in Guild Boss than it does elsewhere. So back to the datasheet again. So that's why you can see the Void Gazer at level 1 actually second on the damage results, because we are comparing a level 1, which is dealing 3% bonus damage for every tile between it and the boss, and it's taking somewhere around 5 tiles or 6 tiles between it and the boss, so it's actually adding up to be quite a large amount of damage increase. I think it probably comes to around 15%, which is why it loses out to the 18% from Flawless Blade at max stacks, 6 times 3. Then we have the Ancient Teachings with the 8% attack gain, and then we have Slayer's Presence with a 10% damage, and then we have Scarlet Hunt because this is non-bleed. So that's enough on level 1 non-bleed. Now how about level 1 with bleed? Well, suddenly with bleed introduced, of course, Scarlet Hunt now wins because this is 20% damage increase. This is higher than all of the other damage increases we saw. As you may have noticed, the majority, if not all of these artifacts are just damage increase. They're not crit damage mostly. There is another crit damage artifact, but I don't have it on the test server annoyingly, so I couldn't test with that one. But I'm pretty certain it would perform worse due to how crit damage is scaled in the formula. Second, we have Flawless Blade because, again, as we saw before, it performed better than Void Gazer. So it's very similar results. It's just everything's been pushed back one as Scarlet Hunt moves from the bottom to the top. But it is not very far ahead of Flawless Blade. 30,253 with Scarlet Hunt on a bleeding target, but Flawless Blade on a bleeding target is also 29,748 because it's only a 2% damage difference. It is very hard to maintain 3 stacks of Flawless Blade during the guild boss though, so your mileage will vary of course. Anyway, let's move on to the end game segment, level 25. So again, we'll start in Artifact Material Raid on a higher resistance target with no bleed. Flawless Blade wins. If we go back to the artifacts just to show you the stats, a level 25 Flawless Blade is now 11% up to 3 stacks. That is 33% damage gain versus a Scarlet Hunt, which is 30% damage gain. Then we have a Void Gazer being tested, which is 8% per tile, which is obviously quite a large amount. And then we have Slayer's Presence, which goes to 20% from 10% previously. And of course we have Ancestral Teachings, which is now 16% attack rather than 8% attack. So what does that mean in the actual numbers? Well, Flawless Blade is now number 1 for the non-bleed damage across both Guild Boss and Artifact Material Raid. It is quite substantially ahead, though you will note that it's still fairly close in Guild Boss with Void Gazer, which performs quite well due to the weird damage shenanigans. This will be less if you place them at the front row. For these testing, I placed Void Gazer at the back row for the fighters, so they are gaining an extra tile of damage there. Scarlet Hunt, of course, performing the worst without bleed because it's just a base artifact then. And we do have Ancestral Teachings at level 25 with no bleed is the second best damage on Artifact Material Raid, so a higher resistance enemy. So I think that's quite interesting. A level 25 epic artifact is beating Void Gazer, it's beating Slayer's Presence, and of course it's beating Scarlet Hunt, but Scarlet Hunt isn't applying the bleed. But still, Ancestral Teachings is performing really well. Bear in mind, Flawless Blade requires you to not get hit to have full stacks. Ancestral Teachings just requires you to be next to an ally. So it's a lot easier to maintain. Void Gazer is not performing very well in this case because you need distance, and I couldn't do that with Abomination. So this is with him basically facing Salazar point blank. So this would perform better on a Valkyria, an Apsan, an Arrogance, or an Araka. So yeah, this is not very respective of the ranged heroes, but the guild boss results are actually very relevant for the Void Gazers because they're being used at their max range as well. So then for level 25 for guild boss, the results are similar, but they do shift around. So Void Gazer now shifts to number 2 once again. Scarlet Hunt for non-bleed is still the worst. Ancestral Teachings drops back to 3rd place, and Slayer's Presence is still 4th. So basically when bleed is applied, Slayer's Presence is the worst. When it's not applied, it's the 2nd worst after Scarlet Hunt. So moving on to bleed finally, level 25, Artifact Material Raid, Flawless Blade beats bleed because it's 33% damage. If you can maintain all 3 stacks, which actually isn't super hard, then you get 33% damage gain, which is going to be better than 30% from Scarlet Hunt. Also, you don't need to have a bleed then. So I don't know. I feel like the uptime on bleed, if you don't have an A3 Salazar and you haven't built him with high attack speed, Flawless Blade might actually be better in a lot of scenarios because you don't have to worry about having the bleed uptime all the time, waiting for that moment where bleed is applied. Flawless Blade is going to be up the entire time you're attacking the guild boss's shield, almost certainly. The only thing I would say to be mindful of is the Meteor Storm from the guild boss leaves a burning debuff. If you have an Eloin, you can cleanse it. If you do want to run Flawless Blade in your guild boss team, then it could be something you could adapt into your rotations, is to immediately Eloin ult after the meteorites land to wipe out the fire debuff. That way you only lose 1 stack of your Flawless Blade and not 2, and it allows you to return to 3 stacks super fast. And I think if you don't have an A3 Salazar, Flawless Blade will probably perform better. Besides that, with Bleed at level 25, Scarlet Hunt is the second best behind Flawless Blade. This is obviously quite logical. 30% is just under 33%. And Void Gazer is no longer able to compete. It's not as good as Scarlet Hunt or Flawless Blade, as the modifier just isn't scaling quite as high, even on Guild Boss where it gets that massive range. Slayer's Presence is not performing very well, as it's only a 20% damage increase, which is competing more with the Scarlet Hunt at level 1, and actually losing due to the base stats of a level 1 myth piece being better than a level 25 legendary piece. And as you can see, the Ancestral Teachings is holding up quite well still. It's third position with Bleed on the target, in front of Slayer's Presence and in front of Void Gazer. Again, a point blank Void Gazer. And in Guild Boss, it's fourth in front of Slayer's Presence. But realistically, what artifacts are you going to have? If you're a player progressing, Ancestral Teachings to level 25 is very easy to do, and you're probably not guaranteed to have a Bleed team or have it in all scenarios. So if you're building a fighter, my recommendation is probably Ancestral Teachings for a lot of use cases. Without Bleed, it's ranked third behind Flawless Blade, which has a pretty heavy requirement of maintaining stacks, which is very easy for ranged heroes like Zillatu and Arrogance or Araka, Apsan, but it's not as easy to maintain if you're using fighters to tank in other content. You do need an ally adjacent to them, and at level 1 it has to be like on the actual compass points. It can't be on the diagonals. But when you do level it up further, which you really should because it's super cheap, it becomes 2 tiles out and it's much easier to get this bonus applied. So I actually do really like the Ancestral Teachings. It performs way better for fighters than it does for mages, because mages have other attack bonus options in their artifacts, whereas for fighters they don't have as many artifacts that grant attack bonus. So you're really competing against damage bonus with this granting 16% total attack bonus. So I do think Ancestral Teachings holds up very well. Almost all of this other damage is incredibly circumstantial, and if you look at the damage numbers on Artifact Material Raid 18, it's actually beating these other artifacts quite handily without Bleed, and even with Bleed, it's doing quite well. It is fairly far behind a Scarlet Hunt, but it's not massive, considering you need a Salazar for Scarlet Hunt to be useful. So if you don't have a Salazar and you're looking at what artifact to build, I would really recommend maxing a few Ancestral Teachings for your fighters. It's really easy to get the bonus. It's very cheap to max these artifacts. As I said in the previous video, you can max 6 Ancestral Teachings at the cost of maxing 1 myth piece, and you can get these way easier. So yeah, I would recommend if you're progressing through the game and you're wondering what artifact to put on your fighters, give them Ancestral Teachings at level 25, maybe max a handful of them, 3 or 4. Again, they're just so cheap, why not? And if you're very endgame and you're trying to make it work, min-maxing, Scarlet Hunt is probably the best for like an A3 Salazar Guild Boss team, but do pay attention to your bleed up time. If you do feel like you get it up enough, then Scarlet Hunt is obviously going to be very good. And if you can find a way to maintain max stacks of Flawless Blade, then this is actually the best fighter artifact in the game. Anyway, that is it for the video, guys. If you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to leave them below in the comments. Just to restate this again, I was unable to test a few specific artifacts, namely Crystal of Vileness, as it does not apply damage in a flat way that's easy to track. So my recommendations are based on not testing a few artifacts for those specific reasons. I'm testing purely on base damage effectively, but still I do think though my results are what I would suggest, but maybe Crystal of Vileness is just much better anyway. I'll have to do some other testing for that. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. Have a great day. Take care and bye-bye.